So I think it's important that those of us who are artists in the West, Europe and the U.S., um, kind of get over this entitled position we imagine ourselves to be in. Um, yeah, 65% of the world isn't European, American, etc. And our time of global dominance is kind of ending. We're kind of in our downslide period. And that's true, not just economically and all that, it's true culturally as well. And I think it would behoove us to participate in the whole world instead of just, sort of appropriating gimmicks from other cultures and throwing them into things. It's like, what's weak about music generally, and um, is that especially from the European idea is a very closed, limited kind of system. It's the thinking about tonality in the West, and this goes back 2,500 years, back to Pythagoras and Plato and all that. The thinking, it's the most restrained and contained way of thinking about pitch among all the cultures of Earth. It's like there's just this and that's it, and it's in a way, the Western mentality towards tonality, towards pitch, is to discipline it and kind of punish it for daring to exist. Like, the sound world is really this complicated, interesting place that should be explored, right? And instead, for 2,500 years, the Western notion of it has always been to limit it and simplify it. In mathematical terms, back in Pythagoras' day, they really could do, they could do their Euclid, and good on them for that. But the way they put that into thinking about pitch was to treat it as purely two-dimensional. And so it's segments of lines, which was what they were good at then. And it dismisses everything that can't really be defined by that. So the thought of a pitch is that it's this one thing, the proportions are based on the overtone series, and like that. It's but sound is not really, it isn't two-dimensional, and it's not that simple, and it never was. And over time, they kind of have made a point of excluding things that upset that a little bit. This is the reason the saxophone never got into the orchestra, was because a saxophone pitch is complicated. It's like a human voice. There's a richness of other overtones in there, and there's this complexity to the sound that makes it difficult to write for it as if it were a two-dimensional thing. Like, a violin's very pure sounding if it's played according to, Western technique, and flutes, clarinets, brass, very, very simple, and that's what they liked and that's what they wanted, and it's because of this prejudice toward this two-dimensional idea about what tonality is. Other cultures didn't do that, and as a result, they're less easy to package, maybe. You can't present this sort of theory of things that's all very precise and like that. And instead, like, theories in other musics are complicated and, interdependent on things, and there's, anyhow, I think it would really behoove us in the West world to open up our minds about that and take ourselves away from that whole way of thinking. There's an idea around it that the Western system is very disciplined and very comprehensive, and in a way it is, but when you think about it, that kind of idea and the idea of discipline in general it's basically a negative, defensive sort of idea. We're going to erect this logical structure so that it cannot be questioned, and it's been very effective in that. I mean, a whole lot of music from around the world is sounding like Western music now, which I think is a shame. But the thing is that we can be very rigorous about music without being disciplined about it. Like, we don't have to punish the sound world for being more complicated than can be easily described by arithmetic, the amount of rigor that one puts into anything is it's simply the amount of honesty one's willing to have about it. That's all rigor really is. It's just like, saying, it's not pretending you got the right answer when you didn't. It's just saying, okay, I got part of the right answer, but not really all the way there yet. That's not such a bad thing. It's, there's this kind of, I don't even really know what to call it, this kind of search for power that wants to dismiss things that it can't explain. And yeah, that's what religion does, right? It says, I can't explain to you why this happened, so we'll just say God did it, and that takes it out, so you're not allowed to question it, right? Deo volente. But, it can be rigorous within a field by just doing your best at it and being as honest with saying, haven't really got all the way with this yet, but this is what we've got so far. And it's cumulative and it's expansive, and it allows the subject to be complicated. And yeah, my real objection to Western theory is that it doesn't allow it to be complicated. It wants to constrain it into this place, and it presents it as if this naturally evolved because it did get more complicated over 2,500 years. And, those who've seen the Leonard Bernstein thing about the evolution of dissonance and stuff like that, and that's all true, and those are really good, by the way. I mean, I grew up on those. But it still kind of accepts this way of thinking as the place to start from. And I believe in the West that's prevented us from really genuinely evolving over the last 100 years or so, is this default back to this simplistic, arithmetic, disciplined idea of trying to like make a limited number of categories within the sound world and then trying to define them kind of specifically. And the attachment to that is wanting to rule music, and this is very clear in the Plato's Republic thing, where he decides what kind of modes and what kind of meters and what kind of instruments will be allowed in the Republic, you know, because they only stimulate these sort of responses from people and they don't want the other kind, you know. And that's sort of been the history of Western music, and it's we really need to kind of toss that aside and grow into the world now. You know, it's yeah, we're not doing ourselves any favors by sticking with this. You know, like it can be pulled and pushed into ways and make wonderful things out of it. But at the same time, that essential idea is self-limiting. And thinking about where this system and this language came from, it was, well, just for starters, the first thing they did was just eliminate all the women. They didn't want to hear about them in music. You know, and even until like, you know, like 150 years ago, they were still castrating boys so that they could sing the women's parts and they didn't have to let women in. You know, in my lifetime, you know, I mean, it's only recently that like orchestras have started doing the blind auditions so that women could get chairs in them because of based on their playing instead of, you know, whether they were part of the dudes club or not. And you know, right now I think there's only one major female conductor of an orchestra. You know, this extends into the academies. Who gets to teach? Well, the people who have the fancy jobs at the fancy orchestras, right? So. And the whole like theory of music was completely, you know, it never had a female perspective. And there have been women who participated in the male world of music and, you know, contributed very well to it, mastered it completely, blah, blah, blah. But contributing to the essential concept, no. No, this is something that got thought up by men who excluded women. In Plato's Republic, again, they excluded all the women so that they could fuck little boys, you know? This needs to be questioned as well. Like, if we want music to be representative of us and exploring, like, you know, the wonder of the sound world, whatever you want to say about it, it's like, whatever you come up with that, if you're leaving more than half of the people who exist in here and, you know, have things to express out of creating the language of it, it's just going to be a lie, you know? And so there is naturalness in the Western system, because there'll be naturalness in anything. But that does not validate it. And it's pretty deeply invalid. It's, despite what good it has and like, it's hard, this thing, because because I am not a rejectionist. I don't want to dismiss 2,500 years of what we found out about music through this male, European, hierarchic, power-based, controlling expression, you know, there are all these negative things about it. But we still learned a lot from it anyway, just the same way as all kinds of stupid things we have learned from. You know, the internal combustion engine, brilliant idea, right? It's kind of destroying us at the moment. So, but we still have learned a lot from that. You know, it's not, there's no reason to dismiss that. The thing to dismiss is its ascendancy and its domination of our way of thinking. You know, I would never say throw away all the harmony books, you know, throw away all the theory books. That would be stupid, you know? It, same way it would be stupid to ignore, you know, Einstein thought about ether, right? You know, and ether doesn't exist. So, like, we don't throw out Einstein because of that. Like, he still contributed anyway. I'm sure, you know, Faraday, who to me is the, you know, kind of the discoverer of modern life, electromagnetism, I'm sure there were lots of assumptions that he based his science on that are inaccurate, you know. I don't really know whether he thought about corpuscles or what his theory of light and optics was. I just don't know that. But it's still really useful. So, like, you know, so don't throw away all of this, but just stop letting it overwhelm everything else, you know, and instead of going about this by appropriating bits from these other musics and kind of homogenizing them into the Western system, which is kind of, I don't know, to my ears, that's sort of what's been happening over the last 25, 30 years, you know. Instead of doing that, like change our basis and, like, take the Western system and sort of pull it into the rest of the world, you know, join the human race, in other words. And I think it's really important that we see that for what it is. You know, like, all these things we don't like, right? You know, everybody hates the status quo, you know, and yeah, all this stuff, right? We need change, and we kind of have to go about that from the initial. We can't do that like using these old tools. These old tools have what are created our status quo, you know, and it's because their initial approach, you know, which in hindsight, like, we can see their limitations at the time, like what Pythagoras discovered, you know, about his ratios and all that. That was brilliant. That was a great insight, and, you know, people hadn't really had that yet, and, you know, he defined it and came up with a thing. Good on him. He contributed a positive thing to the, you know, those who accept that and treat that as if it's a fundamental, foundational thing, that's the error, you know. That's the weakness of that. It's because, you know, he only knew X amount and he worked with what he had and did that and came up with a thing. Good. That's what we all should be doing. Taking him as this rock and then building everything upon it, that's where it kind of goes wrong. And that's, you know, we have to be flexible all the way down, you know, not just decoratively on top of what we do. You know, get at it, get at the sound world. Like, there's no reason we have to think like, you know, some Greek dude 2,500 years ago. or like some church person 1,000 years ago, or, you know, like we don't have to do that. There's no point in doing that. If we thought that way about other things, yeah, you know, we'd still have, you know, more coal and like, you know, women would be property of man and children would be, you know, working instead of going to school and all kinds of stuff, you know. I mean, the world's full of stupid stuff that we used to do. And music has a lot of stupid stuff embedded in it from previous times too. And we should like move through that and get over it. And the defense of that, you know, the defense of our tradition and all that just really is reinforcing all the status quo kind of stuff, whatever you want to call that, you know, and they're tools of oppression to a certain extent, you know, used one way, they're tools of liberation, used another way, they're tools of oppression. And whether we use them or not, we should be conscious of what their functions are when we're using them. So yeah, you know, expand the picture, and to expand the picture, you have to look at the assumptions within it and question those. You know, question the assumptions first. You know, don't just fiddle at the edges of the assumptions. Go straight to the core of them and re-examine them. And, you know, if you get X far with them and you still find yourself like wanting to use a 251 resolution, cool. You know, but choose that instead of just accepting it. It's different. For what it's worth.